Are the Phoenix Suns for real, or will they fall back a little bit throughout the season? We're going to talk about it. It's PHNX Suns Solar Panel. I'm Espo. This is Darth Voita, or John Voita, if you will, from Bright Side of the Sun. And then we've got Brendon Kleen joining us remotely from Locked On Suns. Guys, first off, thanks so much for joining me. The onus of this and bringing back the solar panel branding is in honor of our dear friend Dave King, who obviously passed away over this last year. I wanted to put this together in kind of the spirit of the original solar panel, where we talked to a bunch of different voices around the Suns community. You two obviously were directly impacted by Dave at Brightside. So I wanted to have you both here first. John, you obviously are now running Brightside. Dave was kind of a mentor for you. What was kind of his impact for you?
Yeah, I mean, Dave is one of those people, and we're blessed if we get about 2 or 3 of them in our lives that change the course of our lives, who take a chance on us and believe in us, and if we don't even believe in ourselves at times. And, you know, I've told the story before, but I remember getting a DM on Twitter after doing the Suns. What was the name of our original podcast? The Solar Report podcast.
Until my lawyers called.
Yes, until your lawyers called, and they did so via Dave. And Dave, you know, he saw that I was writing at the time for a different blog site, saw the podcast, saw that we were doing it kind of consistently, and said, you know what, bring the podcast over to Bright Side of the Sun, and while you're at it, why don't you write for me? I thought it was Dave King, you know, the guy who's been running Brightside through the doldrums of the Phoenix Suns era. I mean, he started writing for them in the late 2000s, started running the site in 2010, and to have him reach out to me was something that was an honor. And taking our podcast, the Suns Jam Session podcast there, taking, you know, my writing to Brightside. And as time grew, the relationship grew with Dave, and it was just fun to talk basketball with him.
Yeah.
And obviously seeing you guys on the solar panel, it was you and it was Dave and it was Tim Tompkins, and seeing the impact that you guys had inspired myself to try to do better and be more engaging and take some tips and tricks. And that's why, you know, all these years later, myself, the Fanning the Flames guys, a bunch of other little, you know, well, that's rude, not little podcasts, but a bunch of other little podcasts out there took note from what Dave was doing. And he was kind of the pioneer in that space. And that's why we call him our son's daddy. So when
the Podfather,
indeed, you know, the guy who we literally watched him go gray over the years, dealing with you and Tim Tompkins. And then when Saul joined the show, I mean, he made it, his beard just got grayer and grayer, but a huge impact.
I think that was actually age, not us.
No, you sure? Because it was almost like week to week, like you and him would get into it over something. And then I saw there was one episode like 5 grays popped in when Tim just walked out, and like you didn't see him again for half the episode, and he came in with a different set of glasses on. But Dave, obviously a huge impact on myself. He handed me the reins to Bright Side of the Sun as the managing editor a couple summers ago, and it was an honor that he did so. And I, you know, again, everything that I try to do is just honor his memory by keeping that spirit and that fire that he had for covering the Phoenix Suns from a fan's perspective, lit and going as fast as we can and with the best coverage that we can.
Brendon, what kind of was your experience with Dave? I know you worked with him as well.
Yeah, it's funny to hear John say that he instilled the confidence in him that maybe he didn't know he had. I think my relationship with Dave was that I was like a way overly confident 19-year-old who Dave had to maybe bring down a couple notches. That's probably, if I'm being honest with myself, what the relationship started as. But yeah, man, I mean, John, you put it well, like people that, you know, you're lucky if you have a few of them. I mean, also I would put it that, you know, a person that I find myself thinking about more than I expected, you know what I mean? And obviously Sun season and everything else like kind of creates that. I'm walking around, oh, I was, you know, right there, you know, that, but even just in life and everything. And yeah, it's, we could do a mini series just, I think, on memories and all that stuff. But for the sake of time, I think people should just maybe realize how much Suns coverage right now can be traced back to that guy. You know what I mean? All 3 of us obviously are sharing that, but I mean, Kellen Olson and all sorts of other people that you can say. And I mean, man, sometimes I just think like those days, like you said, John, during the doldrums of how bad this team was for a while and everything else. And you just wake up and go to the site, and he just had like a 600-word smart little take on something that would just get your mind rolling. And as somebody who had to do a daily podcast during a lot of that, it was like, great, Dave just programmed the show for me. Like I'll just give my 10 minutes on his idea, and there we go. We're off to the races. And I think that speaks to a lot of it too. So yeah, dearly missed, but excited to talk Little Suns in his honor tonight or today.
Yeah. Obviously, none of this is here. I don't think any of us are doing it without kind of his impact and the way he looked at it. So, yeah, let's talk a little bit of Suns basketball, because Dave would much prefer us doing that than talking about him.
Very true.
We know that for sure. Teased it off the top. Obviously, the Suns off to a fairly hot start. On Wednesday night, they hit a speed bump against the Sacramento Kings. Injuries played a large part in that. They sit at 9-3 now, but they're kind of middle of the pack when it comes to offensive rating and defensive rating, and have won at a higher clip than math would suggest that they should. Do you guys feel that this team is for real, or are they a little bit of fool's gold right now, Brendon?
I believe it. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm just drinking the Kool-Aid. Maybe I'm just, along for the ride for our first awesome, fun season in a while. I'm willing to admit my bias on that, but here's the thing. Like, I actually think the defense, if I'm just watching it, feels maybe better than those numbers would suggest, at least in the past few games. And maybe that's because we've seen some of the better defensive personnel actually get a shot. You mentioned Wednesday night's game. Josh Okogie had a moment for sure, and he's going to help that side of things. But it feels like this team is getting chemistry and clicking defensively as a group better and quicker than I thought. So I kind of feel better there. And then offensively, it's like you could almost throw any sort of numbers at me. Until I'm 50, 60 games in, I'm just going to assume a team with this big three and this level of shooting and this head coach is going to be a good offensive team. I mean, in January, February, if it's still middle of the pack, I will hit the panic button, but I'm not doing that now. So I almost think the record is the most accurate thing about this team right now, because there is such a small sample, and what I'm seeing, I really like. So I buy it.
They're frauds. No,
This isn't first take.
Well, I thought it was the solar panel, and I wanted to argue.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, that's my job.
No,
we'll yell at each other.
They're frauds. No, like, I agree with a lot of what Brendon said there. And again, we always say it, wait till the first 20 games of the season, and you'll have a good understanding of the identity of a team. And now, being 12 games in, we've already started to see the development of that identity. It's a gritty team. It's a team that enjoys being coached as well as they are being coached, which is a far cry from last year. You have a system that's being input that's actually coming to fruition. It's not, the issue that we've had with the Phoenix Suns over the past couple of years is there's a lot of talk, but not a lot of walk. Mm-hmm. And they're walking the talk this year. Coming to the season, Mike Budenholzer, we're going to shoot more threes. But when he first got hired, we need a point guard. We got a point guard. We're shooting more threes. Yeah, the metrics are kind of funky. They're right in the middle of the pack and everything but the record. 9-3 record. So are they playing above their expected win total rate? Yeah, they are. And that's because of the performance of Kevin Durant early in the season, locking down in clutch time moments. And the team is 7-0 in games where he is performing in those clutch time moments. So per the analytics, yeah, they're playing above their weight class. But I agree with Brendon. Like, I'm buying into the hype because I'm seeing a lot of the intangible things. That loss last night, when you look at the final being 127-104, on paper, you're like, wow, they got their butts kicked. But if you watch that game, they were gritty. They got punched in the mouth. They came back from it. They stayed within the confines of who they were. They didn't get scattered. And you're seeing all these little intangible pieces that, even though it's some would consider a bad loss in November, that's a building block for something further down the line when they know internally what they can do, that they can reach out to Josh Okogie, and he has the confidence to come in and contribute in a meaningful way, knowing that he's not going to provide as many minutes. So It's tough to say, do you believe the hype? I think we should enjoy the hype.
I think that's fair. I mean, look, I'm not going to lie. There's PTSD to all of this from the last few seasons. And we saw last year people feeling 49 wins was a disappointment. The high of 64 wins and getting your teeth kicked in the second round. Like, there's reason for people to want to be guarded when it comes to this, but I know this could come as a shock to both of you. I'm not a real, I understand the value of analytics, but I think this is one of those cases where numbers do lie a little bit. Net rating, those kind of things, expected win total don't match up with the eye test. When you look at this team, where you look at the impact that Mike Budenholzer has already had on just the vibes, and I hate that word, but it's the only word that seems to actually play into this right now, is they are playing with a lighter load on them this year. They actually are having fun. There seems to be something about that. And we saw with that 21 finals run that chemistry can carry you in a lot of ways, where maybe the talent isn't exactly where everybody, wants it to be for a championship contender. This team has the talent. They have the chemistry right now. So I think they will continue to perform this way. I do expect the offense to kind of pick up and be rated higher. I think if the defense stays in this range, you're actually in a pretty good spot for a team that they thought defense was actually going to be worse this year. I think I'm also impressed with what Bradley Beal's brought to the table. I know a lot, the narrative hasn't really changed on him, but I feel like he, in and of himself, gives me more belief in this team this year.
But he didn't play last night.
He's basically turned into the super role player we wanted him to be, right? I mean, you just talk about, like, I think we're all on the same page that it's not so much the what, it's the how quick. Like, so many of the boxes we wanted this team to check, they're doing it already. And it's 10, 12 games in. Yes, they need to sustain it. Yes, it would be nice if everybody could play a stretch of games together, which we've been saying for 2 years, really 3, because that season when they got KD was even uglier, if we can remember that. But so many of them are already happening, right? And so Beal is a perfect example of that. He's basically become the sacrifice, the buy into the defense, the accept the third role guy that from the moment they traded him, we kind of all knew he would have to be, and he's buying in to the 100% degree already.
Well, and you think about what the contract is with Bradley Beal, and I think that's why there will always be, Espo, you mentioned how people are guarded about this team, and it's understandable. And whenever there's anything relative to expectations on Bradley Beal, due to the size of the contract and the fact that he has a no-trade clause, there's a guarded aspect that the fan base has around him as well, because you take a look and he's averaging 17.8 points a game. He averaged, I think, 18.3 last year. And they're like, yeah, but for $50 million, that's ridiculous. It's like, I get it, but you gotta get past that, everybody. You got to get past what his price total is and look at the roster construction and what he's doing on both ends of the floor this year. That's the thing, is he's bought in to being somebody who's going to be a lockdown defender. You shared that article from The Athletic yesterday, and I read that whole thing, a great piece. I forget who wrote it, and forgive me for not name dropping who wrote it. But it pretty much said that his goal this year is just to have fun again and to enjoy this ride that he's experiencing here in Phoenix. And, he's written on a note, he's crumbled it up, he's put it underneath his pillow, and he sleeps on it every night. These are the fun little intangible stories. Seeing Kevin Durant interacting with Ryan Dunn in a post-game interview where Ryan Dunn's like, what are you going to say about me, Kevin? These are the little things, the chemistry building things that we've missed over the past couple of seasons. And you think about who won the title last year in the Boston Celtics. You go a couple years back and you see the Denver Nuggets. And before that, who is it? It's the Golden State Warriors. Before that, it's the Bucks. Every one of those teams, they possessed that intangible thing of chemistry, organic chemistry. And we're hitting all those little mile markers along the way. The defensive rating might not be there, but the chemistry markers are there.
Yeah. I hate the 50 million always making it's the sunken cost fallacy. At some point, you just accept that's what you're spending, right? And you're not changing that, nor can you. So you accept, okay, that's the money you're spending, but are we getting value in the ways that you need it? Sure, he's not scoring 25, 30 points. You don't need him to score 25 or 30 points on most nights with the guys that you have out there. Is he being aggressive? Is he being active on defense? Those things matter more to a team that's constructed this way than dropping 25, 30 points on, 48% shooting and not doing those other things. So I think people miss out on that. But if there is one thing in your guys' mind that could be the Achilles heel, that if this were to be kind of a fugazi, something that's just a mirage right now, what would be that thing that could take them down, John?
For me, it always comes down to size and rebounding. It is still the NBA, and although OKC is like they're putting Jalen Williams in at the 5 now. I mean, they're going super small ball and playing that 5-out scheme. But at some point, size and rebounding will matter in the playoffs. And I think that that's, again, one of the reasons why so many people are concerned about Yusuf Nurkic when he has even an average game. They're like, well, that's why we can't win a championship right there. You can see it right there. He's going to get played off of the court. But again, I think it comes down to scheme and coaching, and the use of Oso Ighodaro has been something that I'd like to probably see a little bit more of in the long term, not the short term, but the long term. And I think that overall size and rebounding is kind of where I think our Achilles heel can ultimately be, because outside of that, we have guard depth, we have wing depth, and we do have big depth, but we just don't have the ability to play that 5-out scheme unless it's KD at the 5 or unless we get Oso Ighodaro comfortable enough to play in that 5-out scheme.
It's funny, right? Because I think we can all agree that this is an awesome start, and we agree it's sustainable. But a lot of the structural things about this team, I don't feel differently about than I maybe did at the beginning of the year heading in, right? So I look at probably Ryan Dunn's the guy who maybe changes that the most. But I still think that overall, like you mentioned Oklahoma City, I'm terrified to sit down and watch that game on Friday. This team is, the Thunder, just more athletic, more forceful, more overwhelming than the Suns. Like, you can't get around the fact that the Suns, 2 of their 3 best players are in their 30s. Yusuf Nurkic is in his 30s. Tyus Jones is on the older side. They're not at that same level, and so they're going to have to win in other ways. But I think that that's always going to be kind of this impenetrable thing that this team's going to have to account for is. And then Minnesota right after that, another good example, right? Like those types of teams are going to pose problems. We've seen it in the playoffs for multiple years now, Dallas 2 years ago and everything else. So that would still be mine. But the other thing I want to throw back at you guys is, I mean, if a person who maybe didn't watch this team and didn't have the level of granular, like this guy's better, that guy's worse, this buy-in's happening, that buy-in's happening, were to just look at the schedule and all the kind of top-level metrics, they'd probably say the Suns might be getting lucky. Right? They'd be saying, they're winning all these close games. They're 7-1 in the clutch. Up until last night, they were positive in the fourth quarter, which was not happening last year at all. And why haven't they blown anybody out? Right? Do you guys worry about that at all? Like a game like Utah or something like that, or I'm looking a couple weeks ahead, there's a Brooklyn game. Like, do you guys care as we're going through a regular season to see, I just want to see them beat down a bad team?
Well, look, I throw the Utah game out because of the point differential thing, right? Because I think that would have looked like a blowout if there weren't 5 fouls in the final minute 15 and the Suns having to take 2 full timeouts during that time too, because everybody's fighting for this point differential. That's probably a 14, 15 point win because they're up 11 with a minute 15 to go. And then all the tomfoolery happens to try to cut that down because of point differential. So I think that game I throw out. And then you look at all the others, you're playing quality competition. Like being in close
point to Portland, right? They kind of let that one.
That's the only one. That's the only one, though.
That's fair, but you did have a pretty sizable lead, and you backslid a little bit. I get that, and the killer instinct on those things is concerning. But when you look at it, these are the games that cost them from being a 49 or caused them to be, a 49 win team rather than a 59 win team last year or 56 win team, whatever the case may be, because they blew a lot of those games. And the fact that they're winning them now should be a sign to the league and other people watching that, this team might have actually figured it out in ways that they hadn't last year when they were still pretty good. Because I think there's a whole, everybody's so negative on what last season was, and rightfully so at times because of the chemistry. But when you look at the reality of the number of games they won, the close games that they lost last year, they weren't that far off from being the team that everybody thought they could be.
Yeah, I definitely, I understand where people are coming from with that. Like, why aren't we just blowing people out every now and then? You look around the league, and every team's doing it.
Yeah.
OKC's blowing teams out. All the good teams, they're winning some close games, and that's what defines a really good team versus an average team. As you mentioned, like last year, we ended up being average because we couldn't close games. We couldn't do the little things in the clutch moments. Again, 20 and 21 in clutch games last year, right? But we're not blowing anyone out, and I can understand why people can be frustrated with that. But again, we still have that small sample size, and this team is still gelling together. There is a lot of continuity, obviously carried over from last year with returning players, but it is a new system. It's a new style of play. They're shooting the three ball, obviously, much more than they ever have in the history of the franchise. And so while they're learning to play within the confines of what Mike Budenholzer's offense is and understand how to get back on defense when those shots aren't falling, they're allowing teams to get back in games. I'm interested to see if they can blow out a couple teams here and there, because like every fan, I just want to feel good inside after a win. And I'd like to go on a post-game podcast and not have to talk about how, man, we almost let that one slip away. We're thankful we won, but why aren't these things happening? What do you think, Brendon?
I also just think the beginning of the season schedule has been tough, So I think if you had told anybody, hey, they're going to, narrowly beat Dallas a couple times, they'll take 1 or 2 from the Lakers, we didn't know how the Heat would look, but that was a team that gave the Suns a lot of trouble last year. They'll beat them. I think people would have taken it and felt pretty good. So I think that they just need to maybe start, like I said, that Brooklyn game. I look ahead. I know we're a little ahead of ourselves if I go this far, but their January schedule is an absolute joke. They play the Hawks and the Hornets and the Wizards and the Pistons and the Nets again and all this. Like, just start beefing up your resume when you need to. In the meantime, I'll take some shorthanded wins and some clutch, sigh of relief games and everything else, and we'll kind of worry about that when the time comes. I'm on your guys' side of it.
Brendon, I can't look at January. The furthest I can get is Christmas and go, just don't get blown out on national television on Christmas. Like, that's as far ahead as I could go without going, okay, I'm probably too far. It's at Christmas. Just don't spoil what will probably be a pretty good day up until that point.
It is every year. It's like, and we always get the late game. So it's like you go through the whole Christmas, you're looking forward to it. You've unwrapped all your presents, but you're like, I got one more over there in the corner. Let me just go unwrap that. And it's a Suns game, and they just
then Aaron Gordon just dunks on your entire team, and you're just crying yourself to sleep. Yeah.
You can follow Brendon Kleen at Brendon Kleen 14 on Twitter. You can hear him on Locked On Suns daily, and you can also read him on Awful Announcing. I've really enjoyed your takes on sports media because I am a sports media nerd. You can follow John at Darth Voita on Twitter, and you can find all the shenanigans over at Brightside of the Sun. Also, support Brightside Night, Dave King's Brightside Night. That is an important cause near and dear to each of our hearts. You can follow me at Espo. You can follow the PHNX Suns at PHNX_Suns. This has been the PHNX Suns Solar Panel, and we'll catch you next time.